Hello, it's Paddy here from Creative Media here in Bristol in the UK. I've been writing a bit of trance music recently, and those of you familiar with trance will know that kind of pulsing effect where the bass drum hits and then the instruments kind of pulse between each bass drum hit. This is a bit of a style thing, but it also means that the bass drum is quite clean because all the other instruments are brought down each time the bass drum thumps, so you hear that bass drum quite clearly. My bit of music I've got here hasn't had that done to it yet, so everything is just full volume all the way through, and it means the bass drum's not coming across as kind of strongly as it should be. So what I want to do is get all the other instruments to pulse. This is usually done with something called a side chain compressor. If you write trance, you'll be familiar with a side chain compressor, or if you do any other kind of sound engineering, you probably will be. It's a very useful thing, and it's what most trance people use, I think. What the side chain compressor does, effectively, is listens to the bass drum. When it hears the bass drum, it turns down the other instruments, and when the bass drum stops, it turns them up again, which it does for each hit of the bass drum, and gets you that pulsing effect. But even though I know the theory of how this works, it just doesn't come intuitively to me, and it also seems to use up a lot of my computer's processing power, and before long the computer can't actually keep up with playing the tracks live. So I wanted to find a different way of doing this, and one way is to use a MIDI gator, which I've got here. I've got this one written by Destroy FX, which is really good, really simple, and I downloaded it for free and gave them a donation, and had a very nice email back from them, so that made me feel good and makes me want to use it as well. Okay, so how do I make this work? I've put my instrument tracks here in what's called a folder in Reaper, which is the software I'm using here. It might be called a group in your software. What it means is I can turn down the instruments all in one place. There's two separate instrument tracks here, but I've got a master control here to control them both. And that's not compulsory for what I'm doing today, but it's useful. Here is my gator. What I'm going to do is add some receives to the gator. I could do this in Reaper. I could do this the other way around. I could add sends to each track, but I can do it all in one place here. So I'm going to add a receive from Stereo 3/4, which is one of my instruments, and also a receive from bad track naming here. I know this top albino track is the track I want. This one here is actually the bass drum. So I've added those two. I also want to choose pre-fader. That means whatever I do with the volume control here, the output of the track will still send to my gator track. So I want that pre. This might make more sense later. And also what I've done, I've written a MIDI track here of offbeat notes, because what the MIDI gator does is when I play a note in MIDI, it lets the sound through, and when there's nothing playing, no sound gets through. If I play this back, you can hear that pulsing effect. And if I turn down the original tracks, you can hear that the signal through this gator track is still getting through, but there's nothing from these tracks. And if I mute the gator track, then there's no instruments at all. And the MIDI gator itself, this just for effects, you can control the kind of decay of the gate. You can make it very short. You can make it quite smooth. You can make the timing kind of a bit more skippy by changing the attack and release. And of course, the great thing is, since it's controlled by MIDI, you can alter the gates quite independently of how the bass drum is playing. So if I extend that first note and remove that note there, maybe. Now that is something you could not do with a side chain compressor that's based on the actual audio sound of the bass drum. And of course, if the bass drum stops, my MIDI is still controlling that gate. So my gate is totally independent of the bass drum sound, which gives you a lot of creativity, and in progressive trance, creativity with the effects is a lot of what it's all about. Of course, the downside is that you have to actually play in the notes or write in the notes to control the gate. But if you've got a very simple bass drum like this, which a lot of trance will have, then probably you can make a loop of 4 quavers and you're there. Another advantage is I can do some interesting effects if I open the volume control on these ones and automate the volume here. I can fade out the sorry, I can fade out the gated track and then fade up these tracks here. If I let a little bit of the lead track through. So you can hear this bit here, the pulsing effect reduces, and the unpulsed track fades up. I hope this makes sense to you. I'm not really explaining it very well. But in short, using a MIDI gator gives you a lot more control than you'd get from just using sidechain compressors, and I'm sure it uses a lot less process powering as well. Of course, you could actually have on-beat pulses instead of off-beat pulses. And that's really easy to do. You don't have to mess around with creating kind of fake bass drum tracks to use in the side compressor, in the side chain compressor. You've got all kinds of control that you can use. I hope that's given you some inspiration into different ways of making your sound work, and maybe it's got you out of a bit of a fix where you've run out of processing power, because it has for me. Have fun making your music.